Sports Final reporter Michael Memis spoke with Tompkins Cortland Community College head men's and women's cross country coach Peggy Dunham about how COVID-19 has impacted their 2020 season. Let's jump into that.
Hello, I'm Michael Memis, and I'm joined by Peggy Dunham. She is the men's and women's cross country coach at Tompkins Cortland Community College. Peggy, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing all right. Now, your team, they competed in the fall, which was very rare occurrence because of the fact that basically no other sport in Tompkins County besides esports competed in the fall. So I guess, how was it coaching an athletic season in the middle of a pandemic, especially one that was that caused all other sports to be canceled?
With cross country, it's a little different than other sports because you don't have any physical contact with the other players. And the way we did the racing was different also to alleviate that close contact with other runners. But so this was kind of the NJCAA saying, let's do this, let's go about this, and if this works now, this gives us a outline of how to handle other sports going forward.
Now, you mentioned some precautions that were taken. I guess what were the full precautions that your team took? I know I read about a little bit, but what's like everything you guys did to make sure there was no spread of this virus?
Coming in, our student athletes had to be tested, COVID tested. So we could start the season knowing that at that point they were negative. And then we had a small team of 7 runners, so we were within the grouping of New York State's protocols for how large a group you could have. So that wasn't an issue because I know other sports that were practicing later on in the fall, they had to break the teams up into like groups of 10 and so to practice. And you wear a mask during our meetings. When they were actually physically active, they didn't have to wear their masks as long as they were keeping distance. And then the meets were a lot different than what people are used to because it wasn't head-to-head competition. Each school would arrive an hour before their scheduled time to run, and the team ran all at the same time. If there was women, they ran at the same time with the men from that school. Then at the end of the day, all the times were put together, and that's how the results were posted. So you wouldn't know how you did until the end of the day as far as team-wise, where we placed.
Okay, now you mentioned that there was testing at the beginning. Was there any situations where someone tested positive or they showed symptoms or via contact tracing was shown they may have it where they did have to isolate? And I guess how did you deal with that if there was any situation like that?
Actually, we were very, very lucky. No one tested positive for COVID on our team. So we didn't have anybody that had to isolate, and we were lucky that we didn't have any athletes that had to quarantine because they were in contact with someone who was positive. So we were lucky in that way. We were one of 2 schools in our region that actually ran every meet. So that kind of was, even though maybe we weren't the top team overall for finishes, we were one of 2 that were able to compete at all our meets.
Well, that's always good when it runs smoothly and that you didn't have to deal with that situation. Now, it is the team's second season, and you were coach for both of these seasons. So I guess this is obviously very different than the first one, but how would you compare this season to the first one?
It was we had 4 returners that were able to participate, and they were like ready to go, and their leadership helped with the new runners that we had this year. They were ready to run. These guys hadn't done any organized sports since last fall. So, and our freshmen were all the high schoolers last year, and were not able to compete in the spring for their high schools. So everybody was ready to roll and they were ready to go. And I think the experience that the sophomores had from last year, they were able to help with the freshmen and kind of lead them through the season, and that was really a plus for this year compared to last year, where they were like, oh, this is new, we've never done this before, and there was no one to tell them, hey, this is how things are done.
Now, you said 4 returners were able to do it. Were there some people who weren't able to for some reason, and why was that?
Last year we kind of had a good solid 5 competitors, and then we had about 3 that were so-sos, they'd miss meets or whatever. So we had actually 3 were returners from last year, and 1 was switched sports. He did soccer last year, he did cross country this year, so he was like a second year student athlete, but only a first year cross country runner. But their experiences helped a lot. So they're those 3 plus the 1 from soccer last year were able to help the program along. And um, the other runners that we had last year either graduated or did not continue in school this year.
Got it. Now, I guess you were the first coach of this team, and you did have an extra year kind of to recruit people, but I guess, can you describe this experience of building an entire program from the ground up?
It's kind of exciting to be out there and be when you're in the recruiting phase, which is what, every year, you have your season and then you go out and recruit, and for the next year it's to say, hey, this is a new program, you're going to make history. So last year it was a big thing for the guys to say, hey, look, you're the first guys that ever ran for Tompkins Cortland. You're the first guys that, and last year we had one of our runners was all conference runner. So, hey, you're the first one ever for Tompkins Cortland to be the all conference runner. So that whole history making thing was a big push for the guys. And that continued a little bit this year, with trying to better their record from last year. So it's been, like I said, it's been exciting. It's been fun. I do have an assistant coach with a lot more experience than myself as far as years behind him, but his experience is great and it helps us out a lot.
Okay, yeah, it's great to also have an experienced and helpful assistant coach. Now, you are labeled as the men's and women's cross country coach, but right now you do only have a men's team. Are there plans in the future to have a women's team or even have other track, winter track or spring track teams?
Women will have at any time. We've been recruiting, but just have not had anybody that has committed to running for us. And that we're seeing low numbers on the women's side throughout our region, because there was no full women's teams in our region competing this year. There was four or five teams where they had like 3 or 4 girls. So I would say numbers are low throughout the area. So we're always recruiting for them. And, there has been talk on that about the track and the indoor track. We don't have a room to put a track up at TC3. So it'd be something we would have to talk with maybe Dryden or something to be able to use their facilities if we were to pursue that.
Okay. Now, good luck to you, obviously, in the future with your seasons, and if you decide to expand the program, and good luck with that. But I have one final question. If you could describe this season in one word, what would it be?
That's funny that you said that. I guess the word would be believe. because that was what I was telling the guys our last week of the season. Believe in yourselves, believe in our squad, believe in your training, because we were working up to our regional championship, and just trying to get them motivated. So I guess that was our word of the week for our last week of the season, was believe. So we had to believe all season that things were going to work out and that we were going to make it to the end of the season through this pandemic.
Well, thank you. And obviously, I'm glad you were able to get through a season in the fall despite the pandemic without too many difficulties. Yeah, just thank you so much for speaking to me.
No problem.
For Sports Final, I'm Michael Memis.